I don't get what the big deal is. So what if I slept with a guy who drives a Porsche? My boyfriend still had that beat-up old sedan that made weird noises every time it started. I didn't cheat because I loved the other guy. I just wanted to feel like I mattered for once. And yeah, maybe the leather seats, the champagne in the cup holder, the way he opened the door like I was worth something. Maybe that played a part. But if my boyfriend had a problem with it, maybe he should have upgraded more than just the air freshener. I thought he'd understand. He didn't. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Now let's get back to the story. The sleek black car pulled up to my apartment at midnight with its engine purring like some expensive cat, and I stepped out wearing the red heels I'd bought 3 months ago but never wore for Adam. My legs felt amazing in those heels, and I knew I looked good walking up to my building, but I wasn't expecting Adam to be sitting on the front steps waiting for me. He stood up slowly, and I could see his beat-up Honda Civic parked across the street, looking sad and pathetic next to Ryan's Porsche. Adam was wearing his old jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, and he looked tired like he'd been sitting there for hours. I felt this weird mix of guilt and annoyance because I hadn't done anything technically wrong, and he had no right to be checking up on me like some jealous boyfriend. Ryan drove away without even saying goodbye, which was kind of rude, but also probably smart, because Adam looked like he wanted to punch something. I walked over to Adam trying to act casual and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" But he just stared at me with this expression I'd never seen before. His eyes were moving from my heels to my dress, to my hair that I'd actually styled instead of just throwing in a messy bun like usual. He said, "Maya, it's 2 in the morning and you're dressed like you're going to a fancy restaurant, but you told me you were having a girls' night at Sarah's house." I felt my stomach drop because I'd completely forgotten what lie I'd told him, and now I was standing there in expensive clothes getting out of another man's sports car at midnight. I tried to think of some explanation that would make sense, but my brain felt fuzzy from the wine Ryan had bought at dinner. I said it's not what you think, and immediately regretted it, because that's exactly what guilty people say when they're caught doing something wrong. Adam tilted his head and said, "Then tell me what I think it is." His voice was so calm and cold that it scared me more than if he'd been yelling and screaming. I stood there for a minute trying to figure out what to say, and finally I just shrugged and said, "He just has more drive than you do, and it's really not that deep." The words came out before I could stop them, and the second they did, I saw Adam freeze. His entire face shifted, not with anger, not with confusion, but with something much heavier, like realization. Like something inside him cracked, and he was trying to pretend it didn't hurt. He didn't speak right away, just stared at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. I could tell he was rewinding every conversation we'd ever had, every smile, every late-night dinner and stupid movie we watched on his tiny laptop in that apartment. Replaying them in his head with this new filter, wondering if any of it had been real. And all I could think was, why is he acting like this is such a betrayal? I hadn't meant to say it out loud, but once it slipped, I didn't feel sorry for it. Because it was true. Ryan had a Porsche. He dressed like he actually cared about his future. He talked about investments, real estate, moving to Dubai one day. Adam still worked at the same computer repair shop he had when we met. Same paycheck, same daily routine, same hoodie he wore every Sunday. No growth, no change, no excitement. I didn't cheat because Adam was a bad person. He was sweet, kind, thoughtful, in a quiet way. But I wanted more than kind. I wanted to feel like I was going somewhere, like the person beside me had vision, like I wasn't stuck in some slow, unchanging version of life just because it was comfortable. And Ryan felt like movement. I thought Adam would understand that. I really did. He always said I deserved the best, that I was meant for more, that he wanted me to be happy, even if it meant without him. But the second he realized Ryan wasn't just some flirty coworker, that I had actually gone behind his back, snuck around, lied, Something in him broke. He laughed, but it wasn't real. It was hollow, bitter. He didn't even yell. He just looked at me like I was a stranger, like he was embarrassed forever thinking I was different. I tried to explain. I told him I needed more, that I didn't plan for it to happen, that Ryan made me feel seen, made me feel like I had potential again, that he took me to places Adam couldn't afford, treated me to things I didn't even ask for, that this wasn't just about sex or money, it was about momentum. But none of it landed. Not the logic, not the honesty, not even the guilt I started to feel once I realized how deep this cut him. He said friends don't drop you off at midnight wearing clothes you've never worn for your boyfriend of 2 years. I said maybe I would wear nice clothes for you if you ever took me anywhere that required them, but your idea of a nice date is Applebee's and a movie. He said I take you places we can afford on my salary because I'm trying to save money for our future, but apparently you'd rather spend time with someone who can afford to waste money on impressing you. I felt myself getting defensive because he was making me sound shallow and materialistic, when that wasn't what this was about at all. I said it's not about the money, Adam. It's about effort and making me feel special and like I matter. He said I work 50 hours a week and spend every weekend with you, and I cook dinner for you 3 times a week, and I fixed your car last month for free, but apparently none of that makes you feel like you matter. I said that's different, and he said how is it different, Maya? I couldn't explain it without sounding terrible, so I just said, you wouldn't understand, because you don't think about these things the way I do. He said try me, and I said Ryan makes me feel expensive and important and like I'm worth investing in. Adam said investing in like buying you dinner, or investing in like planning a future together because I thought that's what we were doing. I said we've been together for 2 years, and you've never even talked about proposing or moving in together or anything serious. He said I've been saving for an engagement ring for 8 months, Maya, but I wanted to do it right and get you something beautiful, not some cheap piece of jewelry you'd be embarrassed to show your friends. I felt my heart skip, because I had no idea he was thinking about proposing, but I also felt annoyed that he hadn't told me. I said you should have said something, because how was I supposed to know you were serious about us? He said I tell you I love you every day and I've met your parents and you have a drawer at my apartment and we talk about moving to a bigger city together. I said talking isn't the same as doing. Adam and Ryan actually does things, instead of just planning them forever. Adam was quiet for a long time, and then he reached into his pocket and pulled out my spare apartment key and my gym membership card that I'd left at his place. He threw them at my feet and said, then go live in his passenger seat, Maya, because I'm done trying to prove I'm good enough for someone who thinks I'm not worth her time. The keys hit the ground with this tiny metallic sound that seemed way too loud in the quiet street. I said, Adam, wait, you're being dramatic and this doesn't have to be a big deal. But he was already walking toward his car. He turned around and said, it is a big deal, Maya, because you lied to me, and you're cheating on me, and you just told me to my face that you think I'm not good enough for you. I said I never said you weren't good enough, and he said you didn't have to say it.
He got in his Honda and drove away, leaving me standing there in my expensive heels, holding my apartment keys and feeling like the worst person in the world. I went upstairs and called Sarah to tell her what happened, but she didn't answer her phone. I tried texting Adam, but my messages showed as delivered, but not read, which meant he'd probably blocked me already. I sat on my couch, still wearing my dress and heels, and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The truth was I'd been seeing Ryan for 3 weeks, and it started completely innocently. He worked for our biggest client, and he was always dressed in these perfect suits, and he drove that gorgeous Porsche, and he lived in a penthouse downtown. Every time he came to our office, the other women would stare at him and whisper about how successful and attractive he was. I'd never paid much attention until the day he offered me a ride home because my car was in the shop. Sitting in that Porsche felt like being in another world, with the leather seats and the quiet engine, and the way other drivers looked at us at red lights. Ryan was funny and charming, and he asked me about my life and my goals, and he seemed genuinely interested in my answers. When he dropped me off, he said I should call him if I ever needed another ride, and he gave me his personal number, not his work number. I knew I should have said no, but I also knew Adam would be working late that night, and I was tired of sitting at home alone watching Netflix. I texted Ryan and asked if he wanted to get coffee, and he said he knew a better place and picked me up in the Porsche 20 minutes later. We went to this rooftop bar that overlooked the whole city, and he ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than Adam spent on groceries in a month. Ryan told me about his business and his travels and his plans to buy a house in the mountains, and everything he said made my life with Adam seem small and boring. Adam and I watched movies at his apartment and went to chain restaurants and talked about maybe moving to a bigger city someday if we could save enough money. Ryan talked about booking a trip to Italy next month and buying a boat and starting his own company. I found myself comparing everything about Ryan to everything about Adam, and Adam kept coming up short. Ryan's clothes were expensive and tailored, while Adam wore the same 5 t-shirts and 2 pairs of jeans. Ryan's apartment had a view and marble countertops, while Adam lived in a 1-bedroom with furniture from college. Ryan talked about the future like it was something he was creating, while Adam talked about it like something that might happen if we got lucky. When Ryan walked me to my door that night, he said he'd had a great time, and he hoped we could do it again soon. I said I had a boyfriend, and he said he'd figured that out, but he wasn't asking me to marry him just to have dinner occasionally. He said I seemed like someone who deserved to experience nice things, and he could show me what that felt like if I was interested. I should have said no, but instead I said maybe, and he smiled and said he'd call me soon. I went upstairs, and Adam was already asleep on my couch with his work clothes still on because he'd been fixing computers all day, and he was exhausted. I looked at him lying there with his mouth open and his hair messy, and I felt this wave of frustration that this was my life. The next week, Ryan texted me and asked if I wanted to go to this new restaurant that had just opened downtown, and I said yes without even thinking about it. I told Adam I was going out with Sarah, and he said have fun and gave me $40 in case I needed cab money home. I felt guilty taking his money, but I also felt excited about getting dressed up and going somewhere expensive. Ryan picked me up in the Porsche again, and I'd bought a new dress for the occasion with money from my savings account. The restaurant was the kind of place where they don't put prices on the menu, and the waiters wear bow ties and everything is served on white plates with artistic drizzles of sauce. Ryan ordered wine and appetizers and entrees without even looking at prices, and I felt like I was in a movie about rich people. After dinner we went back to his apartment, and it was everything I'd imagined, with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture and art on the walls that looked like it belonged in a museum. He poured me another glass of wine and showed me his view of the city, and I felt like I was living someone else's life. When he kissed me, I kissed him back because I felt beautiful and sophisticated and worth something. We ended up in his bedroom, and the whole time I kept thinking about how different everything felt compared to being with Adam. Ryan's sheets were probably thread count I couldn't even pronounce, and his bed was huge, and his bathroom had a rainfall shower and heated floors. Everything about being with him felt expensive and exclusive, like I was getting a taste of how the other half lived. Afterward, I felt guilty, but I also felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in months. Ryan made me coffee in his fancy machine, and we sat on his balcony talking about places he'd traveled and restaurants he'd been to, and I realized I wanted this life more than I wanted to feel bad about cheating on Adam. I told myself it wasn't really cheating because Adam and I had never talked about being exclusive, and we weren't engaged or living together. I kept seeing Ryan over the next few weeks, and every time I told myself it would be the last time. But then he'd text me about some new place he wanted to take me, or some experience he thought I'd enjoy, and I couldn't say no. I started buying nicer clothes and getting my hair done more often and wearing makeup that actually took effort instead of just throwing on mascara and lip gloss. Adam noticed the changes, but he seemed happy that I was putting more effort into my appearance. He said I looked beautiful and asked if I was trying a new style, and I said I was just feeling more confident lately. He said confidence looked good on me, and he was proud of me for taking better care of myself. His reaction made me feel even worse because he was being so supportive while I was lying to his face. The problem was I was starting to feel like I was living 2 completely different lives, and I couldn't figure out how to make them fit together. With Adam, I was practical Maya who split dinner bills and shopped at Target and worried about saving money for the future. With Ryan, I was sophisticated Maya who ordered wine by the bottle and wore designer dresses and talked about traveling to Europe. I liked sophisticated Maya better, but I also knew she wasn't really me. She was just someone I was pretending to be because Ryan made it possible. I wasn't actually successful or wealthy or worldly, but when I was with him, I could pretend I was, and it felt amazing. The problem was, eventually I had to go back to my real life and my real relationship and my real problems. 3 weeks into whatever was happening with Ryan, I was getting ready to leave his apartment when he said we needed to talk. I felt my stomach drop because those words never led to good conversations. He said he'd had a great time with me, but he wanted to be honest about what this was. I said okay, and waited for him to continue. He said, "Maya, I'm married, and you knew that from the beginning, so I hope you weren't expecting this to turn into something serious." I felt like he'd punched me in the stomach because I had been starting to fantasize about what it would be like to actually be with someone like him. I said I knew you were married, but I thought maybe things weren't good with your wife since you're spending so much time with me. He laughed and said things with my wife are fine. "Maya, this is just something I do sometimes when I'm traveling for work or when I'm bored." He said, "I thought you understood that this was just physical and fun, and not something that was going to change either of our lives." I felt humiliated and stupid and used, and I realized I'd thrown away my relationship with Adam for someone who saw me as entertainment. I said, "So this was never real for you?" And he said it was real in the moment, but it was never going to be permanent. He said, "You're beautiful and fun, but you're not someone I would leave my wife for, and I assumed you felt the same way about your boyfriend." I said, "Actually, I was thinking about leaving my boyfriend." And he said, "Maya, that would be a mistake because guys like me don't end up with girls like you long term." His words hit me like a slap, and I realized he was right. I wasn't sophisticated or worldly or successful enough to actually be with someone like him. I was just a temporary distraction from his real life with his rich wife and his perfect marriage. I gathered my things and left his apartment feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. I went home and sat in my car outside my building trying to figure out what to do next. I could end things with Ryan and never tell Adam what happened and try to go back to my normal life. Or I could tell Adam the truth and deal with whatever consequences came from that. Or I could break up with Adam and try to find someone else who could give me the life I wanted. The problem was, I didn't actually know what I wanted anymore. I'd thought I wanted excitement and luxury, and someone who could show me a different way of living, but now I realized I just wanted to feel important and special and worth investing in. Adam made me feel loved and secure, but he didn't make me feel expensive the way Ryan did, and I wasn't sure love and security were enough anymore. I decided to keep seeing Ryan and see what happened, because even though he'd made it clear this wasn't going anywhere, I still felt more alive with him than I did anywhere else. I told myself I could have both relationships until I figured out what I really wanted, and nobody had to get hurt if I was careful about it. But tonight, Adam was waiting for me, and now everything was falling apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. I sat on my couch still wearing my expensive dress and expensive shoes and realized they didn't make me feel sophisticated anymore. They just made me feel like I was wearing a costume that didn't fit right. The worst part was, I could see now that Adam had been trying to build something real with us while I was off playing pretend with someone who didn't even see me as a real person. Adam had been saving for an engagement ring while I was spending my savings on clothes to impress a married man who thought I was disposable. I'd traded something genuine for something fake, and now I was going to lose both. I tried calling Adam one more time, but his phone went straight to voicemail, and I knew he was done with me. I'd hurt him in the worst possible way, and there was no taking it back. I'd thrown away 2 years with someone who loved me for 3 weeks, with someone who barely tolerated me, and now I had nothing to show for it except a closet full of expensive clothes, and the knowledge that I was capable of being the kind of person I'd always looked down on. Ryan texted me that night and said he'd heard through his work contacts that there was some drama with my boyfriend, and he hoped I wasn't planning to make things complicated for him. He said his wife didn't know about me, and he intended to keep it that way, so I better not do anything stupid. I realized he wasn't even worried about hurting me. He was just worried about protecting himself and his reputation. I texted back that he didn't have to worry about me saying anything because I had more to lose than he did, but inside I was falling apart. I'd lost my boyfriend and my dignity and my self-respect for someone who saw me as a liability he needed to manage. I'd never felt so stupid and worthless in my entire life. The silence after that text was worse than any insult could have been. Not just from Ryan, but from Adam too. Days passed, then a week, then two, and every day that went by without hearing his voice made everything louder. The echo of my own choices, the shame I couldn't drink away, the weight of realizing I'd broken something I would never be able to fix. I stopped going out. I stopped answering texts from friends who used to adore us as a couple, but now looked at me with this quiet judgment that made my skin crawl. I didn't blame them. Honestly, I didn't want to see myself either. I kept replaying the last few months, all the little moments with Adam that I took for granted. How he used to cook for me when I was too tired to move. How he'd warm up the car in the winter. How he kissed me on the forehead without needing a reason. I didn't realize how rare that kind of love was until I lost it. I tried to pretend I was okay. Posted photos of dinners I didn't enjoy, smiles that didn't reach my eyes. But every night I went to sleep alone in the bed we used to share. I felt it. The absence. The regret. The cold weight of knowing I had chosen ego over love, and now had no one left who cared if I made it home safe. Sometimes I still drafted texts to Adam, telling him I was sorry, that I'd changed, that I didn't even care if he took me back. I just wanted to say what I couldn't before, but I never sent them, because I knew I didn't deserve a reply. I used to think being loved was a given, that it would always be there no matter how far I pushed. But now I know better. Now I live with it. The memory of what I had, and the person I became trying to chase something shinier. And the worst part? He really did love me, and I really did throw him away.